Hi everyone. It's very good to see you all here today. I know it's almost Christmas, our holidays are approaching, and we're glad you made the time to be with us today. On behalf of the ICONS and especially the Committee on Community and Engagement of the Society, I'd like to welcome everyone here today. We're going to talk about how to write a good conference abstract, and we have here Amal Sethi of the University of Leicester, Evan Rosevear of the University of Southampton, Yuliya Kaspiarovich from IE University, and myself, I'm Leticia Kreuz. I'm from the Federal University of Paraná here in Brazil. As a Brazilian, we are so glad and so proud to be hosting next year's ICONES conference, annual conference. So I'm also very proud to be able to be here today as your host. And without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to our panelists today, the people who are going to talk to us and give us very good tips on how to write a good conference abstract. So I'd like to start by giving the floor to Evan. Evan, can you tell us about your experience with the individual submissions and what tips do you have for us today?
Certainly. Thank you, Leticia, and greetings, Amal and Yuliya. It's good to see you again. And hello, everyone. I think I'll be as brief as possible, and hopefully we'll be able to address things via a Q&A just to make matters clear. But I'll give you a general overview. And to some, this might seem a bit remedial, but I've just been finishing up grading formatives for my first year class in public law, and sometimes it bears, despite the fact that I told them 3 times how to do things, sometimes it bears repeating. So if we're writing an abstract, you're trying to accomplish something. And what you're trying to accomplish is informing, first off, the evaluators of the conference, what you're going to be talking about, and assuring them that you're going to be able to present something meaningful at the conference. And second, and perhaps more importantly, you're trying to convince people who might not know who you are why they should come to your panel. So there are a few competing aspects you need to consider. And at the end of the day, it is one of those things that you learn by doing and that you develop over the course of your academic career. I don't know if I can speak for everyone else here, but I'm still certainly learning how to do it. And every time I go through the exercise, I think I get a little bit better at it. So I'll just share some general thoughts on this with you. Many of you will have probably heard something along the lines of write a catchy title. And that is important, but slightly more important than writing a catchy title is writing a title that clearly conveys what you're talking about and has some idea of the argument you're going to make. I would say those two comes first, right? Clear, to the point, and catchy in that order. In terms of the actual writing of the abstract, you're looking in the 200 word range, plus or minus 50 words. Very good ones can be done in 100, 150. Very good ones can be done in 250 or 500. But for all of our sakes, please try and keep it in the 200 to 250 range. Right. You should always probably start with a bit of contextualization. This is the general sentence or two on why this is important. Why, not necessarily why it's important to the world, but why as a fellow comparative, or why should a fellow comparative lawyer or comparative constitutionalist care about this? Contextualize the debate a little bit, offer some general concepts, get to your thesis as quickly as you can, be clear that you're having an argument. It might be an argument that says we should all change the world to political constitutionalism. It might be we should change our definition of, I don't know, proportionalities, third branch, marginally. Both of those are equally valid. It's obviously going to shape how you make your presentation and what the nature of your research is, but be clear about what you're trying to do with your presentation and how it relates to the broader comparative constitutional project. Once you get through that, maybe you might want to identify a few key terms that you're going to use. If you are using anything beyond, say, constitutionalism, you probably want to offer a bit of a definition. Don't assume that everyone thinks the same way about privative clauses as you do. Right? We're talking in the context of ICONUS specifically, we're talking about lawyers working in a variety of different areas of law, from basically every legal system or every type of legal system in the world, depending on how you classify it. So you can assume a basic familiarity with legal concepts and principles, but you can't assume too much of a familiarity with the particulars of, say, the US legal system or the French civil system or anything along those lines. You need to be clear about, assume there are critical skills and a shared sense of epistemology to a degree, but don't go too far into the substance. And again, well, one more thing, I guess. Don't offer citations in your abstract. That's something that gets annoying fairly quickly. Say it in prose, say it to a general but expert audience, just not necessarily expert in your field, and make a compelling case on why you should be admitted to or accepted to the conference, and why people who don't necessarily know you or work exactly in your particular niche area, make a case for why they should attend. Yuliya, do you have anything to add to this?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leticia and Devon. So hello to everyone. Maybe I will start by quick footnotes. You know that for the individual submissions, so for your individual abstract that you send to us for the annual ICONUS conference, we have to assemble the panels because the whole conference works as panels. So it means that when you send your paper, you're not going to present alone. You're going to present with fellow colleagues from other universities, perhaps other jurisdictions. So we, as ICONUS team, have the task to assemble your panels. So the way you write your abstract, and here I follow up on Evan's advice, it's extremely important that it's clear and we know what you are talking about. Because the panel you are going to present on will depend on the clarity of your abstract. So, of course, all of us have different specializations in law, and we are sometimes not particularly familiar with your field of expertise. So for us, it's important to understand where you stand and with whom you would like to present. So what are we doing when we are assembling panels? We are not only taking into consideration the topic, so your research thesis and the abstract that you propose for the ICONUS, but we also take into account other parameters. Of course, it's about regional diversity, it's about gender diversity, it's about seniority. So we try to assemble the panels as diverse as we can. Of course, taking in consideration primarily your topic, but it's not the only consideration for your panels. So for this reason, again, and I repeat myself, the clarity how you expose your thesis in the abstract is key for us to understand what would be the best fit for your panel. So then maybe another consideration, when you submit your abstract, you will see, and Amal will explain it better because he knows how the whole system works with the abstract submissions. Please do consider that you are willing to be a chair for another panel. So that's how we work in cooperation, because for each panel composed of individual abstracts, we are going to assign a chair. And we need to check whether the person is willing to be a chair. So if you want to serve as a chair, and you want to serve as a chair, maybe even for another panel, please do. Because for us, this cooperation and this, diversity in terms of people who chair panels is extremely important. Maybe another word in terms of language. So perhaps you saw that, and you still have a few days. It's the 10th of January, the deadline for your submissions, whether you are going to submit a fully formed panel or an individual abstract. You have the possibility to propose a Spanish abstract paper or Spanish fully formed Spanish panel or English one. But when you propose an individual abstract, you have to write everything in English and put under the brackets that you're going to present in Spanish. So be careful also how you present it in English. I know that we tend to use the translation devices, which is absolutely fine, but also how you deliver the message. And the fact that it's going to be in Spanish, it's extremely important for us. So don't forget, if you are not presenting in English, but you are willing to present in Spanish, put it expressly under the brackets when you submit your title. It's important also for us when we assemble the panels. You have the possibility to submit the paper at earlier stages or at later stages. It's your choice. Again, the purpose of this conference, of annual conference, it's first of all to meet people. So we want to gather, we want to see our colleagues from different jurisdictions working on similar or connected topics. So you can propose a paper, but you don't have to. But remember clearly that when you are at the conference, you communicate orally. So you need to keep in mind, why do you want to present your paper? So we have sometimes different ideas why we propose a fully formed panel or an individual abstract. Usually when we propose an individual paper, we want to collect comments. We want other people to engage with our research. So when you present it, and also perhaps you want to present it in your abstract, formulate it in a way that it will be as useful for you as possible, because that's the immediate purpose, especially for the individual submissions. I will be happy to answer any question later on, but I pass the floor to Leticia.
So much, Evan and Yuliya. Amal, what about you? I know you have some experience with the technical aspects of Oxford abstracts. I'd like you to tell us. I know you also helped assign these panels together. So tell us, how do you feel about it, and what tips do you have for us, considering the deadline for the submissions for next year's conference?
Thank you, Leticia, and thank you, Evan and Yuliya. So firstly, I'll start by saying I kind of echo pretty much everything Evan and Yuliya said. Those are generally all of them are like very important aspects as you put together an aspect of an abstract for a conference point of view. It's going to sound repetitive, but I want to highlight like another aspect of things they spoke. So Madrid, there were over 2,000 people. I actually don't have a count of the number of abstracts, but let's assume the number of abstracts would be 1.5 times that. When people look at the program, they go through things very quickly, and they'll generally not sit and read every abstract. They'll maybe do a word search, environment, judicial review, proportionality, those kind of things. And obviously, when there are 2,000 people, you can, in your jurisdiction or even in your sub-area, be really large, but people wouldn't know you. And there are a lot of people who attend panels, etc., not based on people they know. They'll just see interesting topics, panels, and go for it. That's how actually I, at ICONIS, attend panels. I pretty much never attend a panel with people I know, people who are major in my field, because I see them at other places. I get to hear them. So I'll go for a topic I know nothing about, but I need to know that if that's the topic. So in addition to the simplicity and, and the clarity, what Evan and Yuliya both spoke about, I would, both in your title, especially in your title, actually, I would emphasize using buzzwords, using keywords, not trying to be overtly creative with your title. Because if your title is 4 words of Latin, chances are won't show up on Control+F. It might sound great, but again, think of these things similarly as how you would think on something appearing on Google on the search results. Will someone ever search those 4 or 5 words in Latin? Potentially not. And I mean, this is a big reason why, at ICONIS, we've asked even like Spanish papers to write their, titles in English, because maybe an English speaker would attend your panel, but they might be quite interested in your topic and would like to have a word with you and can reach out in that way, and vice versa, So I'd really emphasize, using those keywords. And it also goes to kind of a point Evan spoke about, and that is a particular topic might be framed in a certain way in your own jurisdiction or your own subfield. But you have to remember that this is like a general large-scale conference. It could make a lot of sense. And here I'm not saying like, try and like rethink your topic, but just using the keywords and buzzwords to link it to a topic relevant in comparative constitutional law. Like one example that pops up at the top of my head is, say you're working on the administrative state in the US. It's a big self-contained topic in itself. It might be worthwhile maybe adding that line saying how this topic can be relevant to those working on fourth branch institutions in other countries. That this is not going to be the title or the abstract which you'll ever submit to a journal, but from a conference point of view, that's kind of important. How you actually position your abstract, your title, ends up being really relevant to who is coming to the panel. But having said that, I want to speak a little bit about some of the more technical aspects and problems that we encounter with abstracts. And I think for those attending, while I'm speaking at an ICONS level, I think it would apply across the board for other big conferences you would apply for. So as much as, just at these, super large conferences, which where the level of selectivity wouldn't be as high as a very niche workshop at, say, fancy Ivy League university, put bracket any name. A big reason why we would, reject a paper, and especially because, we need to take into account deadlines and all, is if you've not followed the instructions carefully and thought, oh, I'll just do it my way. I want to do it this way. I'm too busy to write an abstract. Oh, my paper or my title is so self-evident, I don't need an abstract. If that's something ICONS is asking you, we need it. So if you don't provide, say, an abstract, we will reject it. If you likewise, don't think of this as just something that we are accepting. But I go back to my point, sell it to the larger community. So while this year we've actually capped the number of words at 250, so you can't even exceed 250. But don't write a 30-word abstract. Actually, no one attending the conference then would care about your paper. So use the words nicely. Like Evan said, 150, 200 is a sweet spot. 250 starts going towards the longer end. However, if you think you need it, go for it. But 150, 200 is a sweet spot. So ensure, that you comply with whatever instructions we've given about an abstract. I know this is, a session on how to write an abstract, but I'll just add a line on, look at the other instructions at other parts of the, the submission form. Obviously, we'll be flexible and accommodating. And maybe if we don't, accommodate you at the start, we'll be like, okay, if you correct it, we can, work through it. But it also means that, you are already delayed. We've already started making panels, and then to accommodate you because you've gone about things in a complete wrong way, we will put you on a panel, which is like a makeshift panel with different papers. You wouldn't get the first chance to be on a panel where your paper would really fit in very well. So do, especially for these kind of conferences, be very particular about, following the technical instructions as much as, the good practices of how to, say, write an abstract or how to frame a topic. And in this year, we've tried to simplify the number of things that we are asking you. But still, make sure you do it right. Make sure you do that on time. Because in these kind of conferences, those are also very important because we are really working on very tight deadlines. And I would, I'll conclude with this last point that some of these things can be new. So don't keep it for the last moment. There might be, there might be some technical issues with which you might need to coordinate with ICONS, and a day before the submission or on the submission day, we are very overwhelmed with emails, etc. So we might not get back to you within, 30 minutes. So if nothing, just have a look at the submission system, see if it's working for you, see if you're able to log in. You can technically make a dummy submission right now and edit it before, the deadline. One of the things that this year we are allowing you is you can actually submit anything and edit it till the deadline date. We will also, and again, I understand it's December. You have no idea like how that idea will shape out in July and August. Once we've assembled the panels, we'll have another editing stage where we'll allow like minor changes at that stage. Like right now, we'll allow major changes. You can pretty much change your abstract completely. You can change your abstract. We will have a second phase open where we'll allow more minor changes. Maybe the exact title or a few typos in that. So this is another thing I'm letting everyone know about. But just finishing with this, have a look at the submission system, see if it's working for you, and if some technical issues are there, reach out to Iconess now rather than a day before, because that might just get too late. And if you missing deadlines are things we will generally not accommodate given the size of conferences. So keep all these things in mind. But other than this, happy to answer any questions you all might have. And thank you all for showing up.
I have a lot of questions I've been writing here, and I'm going to start with something you just said, Amal, about these changes and minor or big changes. And we don't know how things will be like 6-7 months from now. And I think for some of us who might have ongoing research, this is like an anxiety we get when we have to submit the abstract, thinking about, oh, I don't know how I'm going to develop this topic until July. And we get nervous about showing what we have, or we might even change our minds in the middle of the road, because things like this can happen in the research. So I'd like to set up like 2 questions for you guys, Yuliya, Evan, and Amal, what you feel. One is about the tips for people who have ongoing research. They don't have the fully formed idea right now, and they're going to showcase some part of this idea in the abstract and probably have a bigger development of the idea until July. How do you feel these people should write the abstract, or like put in towards this idea that's in the middle, like in progress? And if you feel there are many differences, or which differences do you think are like the biggest for like the difference between writing a good abstract for an article and for a conference? Do you feel like the abstract you write for your article is so different from the one we're gonna submit to the conference, or do you feel they're like more close than we think?
Okay, I'll start with the first one because I've seen a few queries over the years on this, and maybe Evan might also have this. So and I'll use like something I'm working on just as an example because I can't come up with an example on the spot. But one of the, biggest, when earlier we didn't have an editing phase and people requested changes. I saw one of the most common type of changes was, and this especially sometimes, a day before the conference, is they would ask us to make an addition to write something really specific. Now, using like just an example of something I'm working on. So I'm working currently on a project on appointments of judges in constitutional courts and how different variables, affect who's appointed. Now, this is pretty much the project, okay? At this stage, I can just write an abstract which says that this project looks at how different variables, including political parties, size of parliament, et cetera, or leads to appointments of certain judges. And that's kind of fine. Frame your abstract in these terms rather than say, right now, I think at this stage, let's say, I think that the number of lawyers in a parliament don't impact who's going to be appointed. Rather than having that specific line in the abstract, and 6 months later, I find that this actually is not true because I found another variable that changes things. So, it's fine to write things in general terms, which, if you're writing on a topic, frame it really generally. You don't need to, at this stage, give the exact finding of your research project or answer explicitly your research questions. You can talk in very broad terms about what your project is doing. And that's actually quite fine from a conference abstract point of view. So I would suggest that to avoid, falling into the trap where 6 months later it drastically changes, write about very broadly what you're working on. And because, again, at a conference level, you're really marketing to other people who are interested perhaps in your work. And as you know, Yuliya started this. The purpose of big conferences is a lot about meeting like-minded people, finding future collaborators, etc. So there, very specific things might not be super useful, which leads me to my second point. Sometimes, yeah, they can be absolutely similar. Again, speaking from my own experience, there is, in fact, this is from last year. There was something I presented at ICONS. The first time I had that paper ready, I decided to workshop it once before, like submitting it, and I actually submitted like 10 days after ICONS. ICONS was the first time I actually drafted. I used it as an opportunity to draft an abstract for the paper, and that's what I used in a journal. However, sometimes it might be strategically worthwhile to frame them differently, especially if the journal is very specialist, if it has certain other requirements as compared to ICONS. It could be like more about closely summarizing your paper and highlighting the key aspects. But here it could be more about talking about your broader project rather than, and perhaps even linking it to the broader comparative debate, which might not be the case for an article abstract. So sometimes, especially depending on the topic, they can be very different. But at the same time, I'll say, and I know I'm not answering this very explicitly, but at the same time, in some cases, they can just be the same. So it really depends on the topic. But it's still worthwhile to keep in mind that whatever Yuliya, Evan, and I spoke was from a conference abstract point of view. And the same, logic wouldn't apply to always to an article abstract. And just plugging in more ICONS in case we at some point next year will have a writing school where we will explicitly talk about a journal article abstract. And if some of you end up attending that, you will see some of the tips you get, while similar, might actually be very different. So yeah, I'll end with this.
Yuliya, would you like to give us
Yes,
your
of course. So to me, the first thing, maybe, and I'm talking under the control of Amal, it's very important to understand that when we are talking about minor changes at the later stage of the submission of your abstracts, it's truly minor changes, because you must assume that we will have already formed the panel. So if we form the panel and there is already a topic and the title given to your panel, you can't radically change the topic that you are going to talk about during this panel. It's just, we can't keep up then with the whole panels that we would have formed by then. So minor changes are truly minor changes. So maybe this is the first disclaimer. Regarding your question about mainly what happens if we have, completely different ideas or our result just changes. I agree with you, it can happen. But what we need to keep in mind that you are not submitting a paper to a journal. You are testing your ideas. This is the fun part of a conference. You really can be bold at the conference. So sometimes maybe the idea is not something very classic, let's say, in your legal fields. And it's wonderful to test and to collect comments. Why not? But to me, I hear, Amal, that you had the experience that you basically submitted the article that you presented. I think that's the purpose of the conference. It's basically not only to collect comments, but maybe ideas connected to your topic so that you can really even go further with your article. So for me, presenting at a conference, of course, you test the idea that will be your future paper, article, chapter, book, whatever it is. But you are broader here. Your purpose is different rather than you submit already a paper to a journal and you have specifically assigned reviewers who will engage directly with the very precise topic you are writing on. So I think that we have some margin here, which is larger and which can allow us to be bold. So I would not be worried too much about, you know, the ideas that can change and fly into another direction before the conference. I think it's an advantage because you can actually talk about those ideas and get a feedback. Yeah, that's what I would say on that.
Good. I'd like to give Evan the opportunity to answer this too, but I'm going to add a topic here, Evan, because you said something very interesting, like don't put citations into your abstract, which is a very good tip. You know, sometimes we get so involved with the works we've been reading and with things that are on our minds that we think, oh, I must put this quote here, this citation, to give people the understanding of what I'm saying. And it can get boring because it's a short paragraph, it's not too many words, and it gets too clouded, right? But what do you think about like citing the names of the authors or even the books, the main books we're using on our work? Do you feel this is an important part of the abstract, or do you feel this also gets like too clouded, too much information, right? For starters, like to begin with the abstract.
Okay. So I'll start with a caveat saying Amal, Yuliya, and I are all offering, I don't know, pearls of wisdom, perhaps would be the most gracious way to say it, right? These are questions to which there are not, in fact, clear-cut answers. So you should take what we're saying with a grain of salt, put it together with the other things that you know, and try and come up with your own answer, because that is the nature of the beast. As a general rule, and I'll deal with the most recent question first, and then I'll go back to the earlier two. As a general rule, I would say if you have to provide a citation for the work you're referring to, then you probably shouldn't include it. So if you're dealing with some sort of novel interpretation of a concept of law or the spirit of laws or something like that, where you can just, italicize the title and everyone knows, generally speaking, what you're referring to, sure. Particularly because there, in the theoretical context, it will be integral to your abstract to explain that you're engaging with Hart and or Montesquieu or whatever, and you're trying to do something along those lines. If it gets any more specific than that, maybe I would advise against it. Where you draw that line about the thing that everyone knows is something ultimately you're going to have to decide upon. But the rule of thumb I would use is if you actually have to provide the publisher and the year, it's too specific. Back to the first two questions, and I think they do actually run together. So the thing that, say, Amal is talking about, where you're presenting, you're maybe doing a couple of little edits, adding a footnote or two based on something someone raised in the panel presentation, like, oh, for a related analysis of this subtopic, see this person, and then it's going in. Your abstract for the conference and your abstract for a journal are probably going to look exactly the same or very, very close to it. For something along the lines of what Yuliya was hinting at in her first sort of presentation, where you're really trying to get ideas, you can get away with being a lot less specific and a lot more general in your abstract. So to the extent you're worried about having to change things because you don't quite have the answer yet because it's 6 months out, that's fine. There you might just want to focus on describing your research question, your hypothesis, the methods and the data that you're going to look at. And say that I'm looking at this question, I'm going to do this to this, and I'll present the findings at the conference. If that's where you are, that's where you are, and you're still demonstrating that you're far enough along in the research process 6 months out that you can credibly be presenting work that is meaningful, right? You maybe have done all of your interviews, but you haven't gone through in vivo and pulled it all together, or you've collected all the case law you need, but you're still working on your sort of jurisprudential analysis, or you have all the quantitative data, you're still working through the statistical models. All that's perfectly fine as long as you have your question, your methods, and your hypothesis in place. You could totally perfectly acceptable. No one expects you to be done 6 months out. And I think that sort of dovetails nicely into the second question, right? The further along you are, the closer your conference abstract is going to look to a journal abstract. The earlier you are, the less it's going to look like that.
Yeah, you said something very interesting, Evan, because of course we make these panels like how to write a good conference abstract, and that is on our point of view, which can be very different between the point of view of other people here. We're here to talk about this and to make things clearer, and of course to give tips, because we all know the three of you have been here before and have worked with the conference, so we know you have many good tips for us that can make our work a little easier, or perhaps a little cleaner, like to write a good abstract. And I'd like to talk about something that's been on my mind forever, because English is not my first language. So I'd like to know if you have tips for those of us who don't have English as our first language, as how we can like better translate things. And I know, Evan, you probably have some tips on this by reading our work and seeing we might write in a different style. I say this because in Portuguese, especially the Brazilians, we tend to put a lot of stuff in, like we put many connectors and many commas in the wrong places, because the commas have different rules in Portuguese and in English, and sometimes things get a little Frankensteinish. So do you have any tips for us so we can make things a little better?
So maybe I'll speak first on this, with the caveat that English being my first language might give me the least to say. First off, don't worry about it so much. It's important that you devote time to editing and revision and making sure your abstract is good and effectively conveys the information you want it to. That's important whether or not English is your primary tongue or your third or fourth tongue. That being said, you should never be embarrassed about having a second language. I come from North America, a set of countries where, generally speaking, that's not assumed, whereas most of the rest of the world, certainly among this crowd, it will be. So you should never be embarrassed that English is your second language. That doesn't mean you don't have to devote effort to it, but don't start from a place where you feel ashamed. Start from a place where you begrudgingly have to accommodate the rest of the world.
I'll say one like quick thing. So, and this is more like a conference specific thing. And with the very strong caveat, this might not apply to a journal. However, this is certainly true for ICONS, most likely true for other similar conferences, and perhaps even true for like a small workshop. We do not run things through AI detectors. We simply just don't have the time to do that. If the best version of your abstract might come through the aid of ChatGPT or a translator, don't be too hesitant to use that. Yes, again, you have to think that, often you are writing something to market it to a general audience. If you, again, and I'm saying this with the caveat that if you think the best version could be through the aid of something, use it. However, I would give the caveat, because we've seen some of these, it might still be worthwhile once you've used tools, whichever these tools might be to help you, to carefully read if it exactly conveys what you want it to. And maybe it might make sense if that is an option available to you, to make at least a native English speaker have a read at it to make sure it doesn't have some awkward word or phrasing, because sometimes things don't translate, especially if you're using Google Scholar, they don't translate very well, words here or there, and it can sound very awkward. So this would be my, one suggestion that I want to repeat what Evan said. Don't be embarrassed about, if it doesn't sound as crisp or the same way as maybe a British academician. One of the beauties of Iconus is more people than not who are attending do not have English as a first language. It's a great aspect of this conference. So don't be embarrassed, but if you think it might help you, especially let's say if you're someone who's presenting in Spanish, and that's actually like, the language you work in, predominantly speak, a few words of English, don't hesitate to use tools. At least at Iconus, from an acceptance point of view, we absolutely do not judge you on that point of view. We would more judge you if you don't follow the instructions, if you don't give anything, if it's completely unrelated to the conference. Those are things we'll more focus on. Certainly not that, it looks a bit, I don't know, AI generated or whatever. At the same time, you are presenting yourself to the broader community. So don't be careful that you're not like sending something that just sounds very awkward, seems very off. So yes, I'll end on this note.
Yuliya, what about you? Do you have any tips?
I can only second my colleagues. Can't say anything
No,
more that could be.
I know you write in
wisdom.
many languages, so I guess you feel the same, probably not the same struggle, but some struggle with this kind of things. But I'd like to ask if anyone on the audience would like to ask a question to Evan, Yuliya, or Amal, or the three of them.
If I could just jump in here for 1 sec, Leticia,
Sure, please.
just to tag on to Amal's statement regarding AI tools. I also would, I mean, obviously you can't represent them as your own when you're submitting to a journal, but to use them as a tool, but think about them in the wise of Wikipedia, right? It's a great way to start your research about something you don't know too much about, but you cannot end there. Don't just put something into ChatGPT and then submit it directly. You're welcome to use these tools, but you are still ultimately responsible for what you submit. So it needs to be used with caution, right? As any tool does. And it does need to be used in the back of your mind. You are responsible for the things you submit.
That's very important, Evan. Thank you. So Franco Peroni raised his hand. Franco, please.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, excellent. So I'm Franco from Iconus Benelux. First of all, thanks to the organizer. I got a question on a topic that's already been touched. So what's the biggest difference between a conference abstract and an abstract submitted for a journal submission? I mean, there are some hints, but if you have to synthesize in one sentence, in one word, what would you change?
Conference abstract can be a lot more about ideas and inquisitiveness. A journal abstract needs to be very clear about what the findings are and how that relates to the existing literature. It needs to locate itself much more clearly within the academic context.
If I can jump in on this one. Let's imagine that you submit the same, your paper is ready, and you just submit the abstract that you wrote and that you are going to submit for the journal. I don't see any problem here either, huh? So it can be either or. So if you submit the same abstract, it's fine. The main difference will be, it's your presentation. You can't present just the paper how you wrote it, because you need to address the audience. So at the end of the day, abstract is not a big deal if it's similar, okay? But just with the conference abstract, you have this additional freedom that allows you to be perhaps sometimes less specific. That's how I would phrase it.
Now I'll just piggyback on the last line of Yuliya, that you just have more flexibility in a conference abstract to what stage of your project you are, what you want to do. Your conference abstract can literally be that, something Evan was speaking about earlier. I am right now at this data collection stage. And my aim is to present this data and see, like, we've actually had abstracts which sound pretty much like this. I'm at the data collection stage. I'm going to share my findings, and I'm going to pretty much see where I can go from there. And there are a lot of people who use conferences like IconS to pretty much do that, to just as a idea board. So you have more flexibility. An abstract like that is not going to be rejected at a conference like IconS. In fact, it would be encouraged. Obviously, you can't have that as a journal abstract where your paper is, I have some research, I'm sending it to you so that if like people, have some views, they can mail me and then I'll write a second paper on it. So yeah, I'll sum it by saying that the conference abstract, there's just more flexibility to do a lot and be creative with the different things. However, they could be mutually inclusive as well.
That's great. Does anyone else have a question? Another thing that was on my mind when Amal was first talking about this topic is sometimes we have problems giving like a title to the article. I was thinking about that, like sometimes to give a title to the abstract or to the panel or even to our article when finished is hard. Like I feel sometimes I put up a few something about literature and everything, and I guess for the conference it's best to go like straight to the topic, which would help people to assemble the panels and also to put together the main topics, right? I'll give you the opportunity to talk about it, but we have another question. Please go ahead, Arushi.
Hi, thank you so much for organizing this. I wanted to pick up from the last question where you said that the conference abstract can reflect your stage of project. But I was wondering if there was a preference that the conference has. Do you prefer more fully formed abstracts? And when I ask this question, I mean, how much are you when you're writing a paper, you're constantly making decisions. So, how many decisions should you make so that your abstract gets pushed in a certain way that it reflects that you've made those decisions versus keeping it more open-ended? And is there a preference in terms of your selection of these abstracts? Thank you.
Do you want to start, Amal?
Sorry, muted. So I'll say this from a policy level, no, there's no preference. In fact, my broader suggestion to you would be, and here I'll try to, kind of even combine something, Leticia said is frame something in the way that helps you connect with other people based on the stage of where you are on your project. Don't think too much about, and at these big conferences, I mean, it's not that it's like a closed secret. The selection standards can sometimes be more, I would say, generous than the Modern Law Review or the Oxford Journal of Legal Studies. So don't think as much about what IconS needs, but think of, how that would help you best market your idea and you to the larger community. Having said that, and here I'm actually speaking a lot in my opinion terms, and it kind of hits to even a question, something Leticia was saying. I would actually, again, very, in my opinion, this is pretty much how I look at the, program when I'm looking at it. If in the first 2-3 lines, the abstract does not impress me, I can't recall a time I've gone to the last line or middle of the abstract to see if this topic has something I might like and whether. So maybe with the topic title itself, maybe with the abstract, just hit the nail from the get-go. Someone shouldn't be needing to go to the last line to know if this is a topic about environmental governance. And again, why I'm again linking it with the title is there are a lot of papers where the title sounds really funky. the first 3-4 lines make you seem something, and then you go to the bottom and it's a totally different thing. This also, and maybe Yuliya and Evan can speak more about this. Sometimes these can be, sometimes be a little bit detrimental in where your paper is actually placed along with which papers, because you're really not in actually the main places you need to do it, you're not conveying the right information. So make sure with all this, you convey the right information, not only to the people who are organized, putting together the panels, but also those who might be interested in attending it. So rather than, I'll just sum up by saying, think when crafting your abstract, think in the way how you can best present what you are doing to the larger public law community. At the same time, that would little bit help the panel organizers make sure that your paper ends up in the best fit panel for itself.
Yes, if I can jump in, I will be very quick. So when you think of an individual abstract for the ICONS, exactly as Amal said, you need to think about two things. You're not going to be on the stage alone and present your paper before the audience. The first thing that you need to communicate your idea to us, because we assemble your panels. So we need to clearly identify what topic, what field of law, what's your thesis, what would be the best possible and most useful for you way to put you in a collective panel. So you address to us first. And the second one, you communicate your ideas. So you want people to be interested in your ideas. So, and here maybe an important footnote, when we say that you can be more, you have more freedom when you write a conference abstract, you do. But don't think that's an abstract saying that's, okay, my research interest is the intersection between European Union and international law is sufficient. Of course not. That's so general, but not too general. Okay, so freedom, but not too much freedom. Again, just two things that you need to think about. That's you want to be put in a panel that will be useful to you. So that's why your abstract has to be clear and communicate what you want to achieve. And the second stage, it's basically how you communicate your ideas to a broader audience who will read the program when the program will be out.
All right. I'll try and address Leticia and Arushi's questions together because I think they do somewhat relate to one another. So for Arushi, I would say what your paper shouldn't be is something to the effect of Evan's ruminations on what public law scholarship is going to look like in 35 years. It's too big. It doesn't have a targeted question or really any form of verifiable or falsifiable answer. So that's really not what we're looking for here. That's more of if you ever end up at the sort of distinguished professor stage and get invited to give a keynote, that's the kind of thing you can talk about there. We would be looking for, and I would advise you to go somewhere along the lines of what is the answer to this specific sub-question of this chapter in my thesis? Because I'm trying to parse it out, and I think there are two ways that you could answer this, and I'm not sure which way. I'm leaning towards this one, and maybe I'll write my abstract such that I'm going to present in favor of this one and open myself up to criticism from individuals who might be adherents of the other view. That would be an excellent way to make use of a conference paper because it allows you to first give yourself an excuse to work more on that specific sub-question, and it opens up the potential for getting input from others who might have dissenting views that you can take under consideration or defend yourself against in future. In terms of title, be clear again. Back to that second thing I said, clarity, context, and catchiness. So last year, and I think Yuliya might be able to back me up on this, there were a lot of AI and ... titles going on. If your paper is legitimately about AI and econ or how it's being used to, I don't know, deal with certain bureaucratic institutions in Strasbourg, something to that, by all means. 2 years ago, it was the metaverse and whatever. Don't use buzzwords in that way. Use them in ways where you understand there's a global literature on this, and they often refer to this word. So transformative constitutionalism. No, nobody really knows exactly what it means, but everyone has a general idea of at least the broad topic area you're talking about when you say that. Right? Or constituent power. People have different ideas about what that means, but everyone has a general idea. You're talking about the sort of the epistemological or ontological justification for imposing an authoritative rule of law on someone. So like, all right, we know what that means. Buzzwords in that sense, not in this is the hot new ticket that everyone is going to try and get funding on the back of this year. Don't use those.
I think that Amal, do you want to say something, please?
I want to say just one word, and this kind of links to last year's. I would actually, if any of you are like really bored in life, I would actually advise you to like go to last year's Iconess program and search AI. You will get the best practical examples of what Evan is saying. There were way too many papers that had the buzzword AI because perhaps that's the basis how we can get funding and all of that. There were far too many papers that had nothing to do with AI and public law. And maybe it was actually the most mundane human rights or health law topic, but somehow, somewhere, the word AI was scattered. And this links back to this is a conference. You want to speak with people who, work on the same things, who might be potential sources of like you sharing your ideas, bouncing them off. So you're not applying for a grant application. You don't need to use those same buzzwords here. So this is basically just a repetition of what Evan is saying, but I cannot emphasize this more because this does impact. And in fact, in a conference like Iconess, it can be counterproductive because when you have too many of those buzzwords, people get scattered to different panels or like just different people. So, try and write your abstract in a way where you actually reach out to the absolute right people. And that's like really, really important. And we will put up the recording. For this part, I would definitely advise you to go and like word by word, listen to what Evan just right now said.
I think it's awesome.
No one has ever said that before, and no one should listen to that.
No, it was very good. These were very good tips. And I think the best part is Amal gave us something to do if the holiday parties get too boring and we have to put up with the crazy aunt or the weird cousin. And then you say, no, wait a minute, I'll have to do some research here. And you go to through the program of this year's conference and search for AI so we can improve our abstracts. Arushi, you have a follow-up question? I think we should, we'll have this as the last question. Go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you so much. I just had one question about you. All of you talked about being in conversation with others being very important. But I was thinking about, do you mean conversation with other people? Like, who do you think about when you're thinking about that audience? Do you mean people who are writing on your topic or people who are writing on your subfield or on your field in general? And how like broad should you go when you're when you're keeping that in mind for your abstract? Thank you.
Probably it relates to what I said earlier. Arushi, I think that's the most important part is that we are talking about a conference. So it's a big conference. Last year in Madrid, we hosted 2,000 people. We will see how it goes in Brasilia, but we expect a large number of people as well. So first of all, you address to the audience of the conference because your abstract, and if you provide an individual abstract, will be put in the panel, advertised on the program for people who are going to be in Brasilia. Okay, so that's your first audience that you aim at. And then it depends what your project is, whether you're working on your PhD on a book chapter, on an article, etc. So, but this is at the later stages when you're going to draft already a final piece of work.
I'll just add this one line that perhaps it's also worth thinking, who at that conference, who would you like to perhaps read your abstract and maybe, attend your panel from a feedback point of view, if that's what your goal with this conference is, and framing it in those terms. And here, again, perhaps just give an example from my, own practice at ICONS. A couple of years ago, I presented something to do with the constituent power. Just using that because Evan already spoke a bit about it, so easy to piggyback on that example. However, I didn't really want feedback or views from people who know the constituent power in and out. I wanted to hear more from people who are interested in human rights, authoritarianism, because at the back of my mind, I was thinking that when it goes for peer review, it might go to a generalist, given how few people work in this space and how hard it's to get reviewers. And those journalists have very different comments than someone who's an expert on constituent power. I very much anticipated questions on this, but what about Hungary? What about Poland? So I actually did not draft that abstract in a constituent power terms, but more in a human rights / democratic backsliding term. Though the real project had 3 lines about all those, but more to do with the constituent power theory. So sometimes it could be how do you want to position that same, project to the ICONS argument audience? And this also perhaps even talks to a point Franco asked about the difference. This is an example of how I, pretty much presented and spoke about the same things, but the abstract looked as if they're of 2 very separate projects. So yeah, I'll wrap it up there.
So definitely echo Amal and Yuliya here. The short form answer, which I think summarizes all of our positions, is you should be in conversation with who you want to hear from.
That's great. I think we can sum it up with the 3 C's that Evan put us earlier today, be clear, I forgot already, Evan. I'll have to listen to the recording afterwards. But I think adding up, we have to be strategic. That's what Amal just said. Be strategic on, be a clarity, context, and catchy. That's good. And also strategic for who you want to talk to, not just what you want to talk about, but who you want to talk to is a very good tip. So I think this finishes up our meeting today. I'd like to thank Yuliya, Amal, and Evan so much for your time and your patience. And I'm pretty sure we all have a lot of things to think about on how we're going to present our abstracts. And we're very much looking forward to having you here in Brazil. We're so happy that the conference is coming here, and I hope you get some time to travel around. Have a good holiday, everyone. Have